He looked NBA ready as a high schooler and put together one of the best collegiate careers in Ohio State history, leading the Buckeyes to the Elite Eight as a junior and cementing his status as a top player in the nation. He was supposed to bring the Dallas Mavericks back to relevance, but tarnish his reputation with a messy contract holdout. And even though he seemed worth the wait, injuries hit him quick, and then a feud with a future Hall of Fame teammate ended what could have been something special in Dallas. And after that, Jim Jackson could never really find a home in the NBA. He seemed to be on the verge of being a perennial all-star, but instead became a player who rarely stayed on a team for over a year, as his 14-year career saw him suit up for 12 different teams. And most of the time during his prime years, he would be on one of the worst teams in the league. And those are the teams that are easy to forget. But it also begs the question of whether or not his stats were inflated because he was on bad teams. But one thing you can't deny really hampered his career were the injuries that he dealt with, as he had knee issues most of his time in the league. And although he wasn't too efficient for the majority of his career, he figured out the perfect role for him near the end. And yeah, he was never truly a star, but he would reinvent himself into a top reserve to help him stick around the league. He couldn't recreate his Dallas scoring numbers, but he made sure he wasn't one-dimensional, as he could do a bit of everything on the court. And whether his career is more of a what-if, or a case of expectations being too high, it's still one that should get some attention. So today we're going to take a look at Jimmy Jackson. Let's jog your memory. An Ohio native, Jim Jackson was the premier high school player in the state during his teen years. He would attend Macomber High School and be named a parade first-team All-American, as well as Ohio's Mr. Basketball, as both a junior in 1988 and a senior in 1989. He would also be a McDonald's All-American as a senior, but his biggest achievement was leading Macomber to the 1989 Ohio D1 state title, which was the first in school history. Jackson would decide to stay in-state and attend the Ohio State University. Jackson arrived to a Buckeyes team that looked much different from the previous year, as they had lost 3 starters to graduation, and their head coach Gary Williams had just left for Maryland, as he was replaced by assistant Randy Ayers. Jackson would be a day 1 starter and would excel. As a freshman, he would lead the team in scoring and assists and be second in rebounds, while shooting nearly 50% from the field and over 35% from deep. The Buckeyes wouldn't be great this year as they were adjusting to all the changes from the previous season, but they still had a winning season, which included wins against ranked opponents like Illinois and Louisville. And even though they lost to the Wolverines in Michigan, they would redeem themselves with a 3-point win at home later in the year against the then 5th-ranked Wolverines team. Jackson would be the team's top scorer in 14 of 28 regular season games and have 5 games with at least 20 points, as he would help lead the team to a 17-11 regular season record and a tournament berth after a 2-year absence. They would defeat Providence in round 1 by 1 point in overtime to advance. Jackson would record 15 points, 5 boards, and 5 assists, but would shoot just 5 of 15. Round 2 brought eventual national champions UNLV, and even though the Buckeyes lost, it was a respectable showing. However, Jackson would again struggle to find the bottom of the hoop, as he shot 5 of 14 to finish with 11 points, but did add 6 rebounds and 4 assists. And Jackson's season saw him named Big Ten Freshman of the Year, with averages of about 16 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. The 91 Buckeyes reached another level. A sophomore Jackson led the team in scoring, finished second in assists, and third in rebounds, while upping his shooting to nearly 52%, as he, Perry Carter, and Jamal Brown spearheaded an incredible Buckeyes season which saw them start the year 17-0 and rank as high as number 2 in the nation, before finishing the regular season at 25-3, and their 15-3 record in conference play earned them the Big Ten championship. And the Buckeyes entered the NCAA tournament as a 1 seed, where they would get Towson in the first round. This would arguably be Jackson's best tournament game of his college career, as he put up 24 points, 8 boards, and 5 assists on nearly 59% shooting as Ohio State advanced. They would play and defeat a Georgia Tech team led by Kenny Anderson in round 2. Jackson would put up 16, 8, and 4, but his shooting woes returned, as he shot below 30%. The Buckeyes would fall in the Sweet 16 to a St. John's team, led by Malik Sealy. Jackson would put up 19, 4, and 5 on about 47% shooting, but it wouldn't be enough, as St. John's starting 5 combined for 86 of their 91 points. And for his sophomore season, Jackson averaged about 19 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game, as he would be a consensus first-team All-American and the Big Ten Player of the Year. Jackson would continue to improve as a junior in 1992. He would be the team's leading scorer, with the next closest scorer being nearly 10 points behind, and would shoot over 49% from the field and over 40% from deep. He would also be the team's top rebounder and second leading assist man. Ohio State would go 6-0 to start the year before losing to unranked USC in overtime, and overall they would finish the season at 23-5. They would enter the tournament as a 1 seed and defeat Mississippi Valley State in round 1 quite easily, even though Jackson went 3 of 13 from the field. They would defeat UConn in round 2 behind Jackson's 23 points and 11 rebounds. But he would again struggle as he shot below 27%. They would then defeat North Carolina in the Sweet 16 to advance to the Elite 8 versus Michigan and their Fab 5. The Buckeyes were looking for the clean sweep, as they had defeated Michigan by at least 10 points in both their regular season matchups. But they couldn't get the win that mattered most, as they lost to Michigan by 4 points. Jackson would lead the team with 20 points on a respectable 9 of 21 shooting, but he couldn't protect the ball, as he committed 9 turnovers in what would be his final college game. His junior season would again see him earn the Big Ten Player of the Year and a consensus first-team All-American selection, as he put up about 22.5 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. Jackson would elect to forego his senior year and enter the '92 NBA draft as a highly touted prospect and the top-ranked guard in the draft, who would be NBA ready from day one. So after a trio of big men were taken off the board,
in the 1992 draft, the Dallas Mavericks select Jimmy Jackson from Ohio State University.
The '92 Mavs had been one of the worst teams in the league, finishing at 22-60 with an aging core of Derek Harper, Rolando Blackman, and Fat Lever. But going into '93, they would only have Harper available, as Blackman had been traded to New York, and Lever would miss the year with a knee injury. And Jackson's rookie season would be quite eventful, but for all the wrong reasons. The Mavs would be without their top pick to start the year, as Jackson was holding out, as he and the Mavs couldn't come to an agreement. Jackson reportedly was seeking a 6-year deal worth about $21 million, while Dallas was only willing to do 4 years at about $11 million. And Jackson wasn't going to save the Mavs as a rookie, but without him, they started the year 1-14, and after their 11th straight loss, Jackson released a public statement saying that he had no intention to ever sign with or play for the Mavericks, as it seemed they had just wasted a top 5 pick. Fast forward to March 5th, and the Mavs are on life support, sitting at 4 wins and 50 losses. But then the headline came out that they had come to an agreement with Jackson, who basically got what he wanted in the first place, as he agreed to a 6-year deal worth about $20 million. And it was clear how desperate the Mavs were to lock him up, as they agreed to pay him a full year's salary, even though at most he was only going to play the remaining 28 games of the year, as the $2.6 million he received for the 28 games was more than the 2nd and 3rd overall pick of the draft were being paid for their entire season. Jackson would be a starter, but underwhelm in his first career game, putting up 6 points and 5 turnovers in a March 5th loss to Houston. He would find his groove near the end of the year, as he scored at least 20 points in each of the final 7 games, including a season high of 32 in the second last game of the season. Jackson helped the Mavs go 7-21 the rest of the way, but they still finished with an 11-71 record, which at the time was the 3rd worst record in NBA history. And Jackson's brief rookie season saw him average about 16.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. Then in the offseason, Jackson had to deal with some legal troubles, stemming from a March 26th incident where he was charged with menacing, as he allegedly waved a gun at 4 teenagers. However, he would be acquitted of all charges about 5 months later. Lever was back for his final season going into '94, but Harper would only last 28 games before being traded to New York on January 6th. The Mavs also had hired a new coach in the offseason, in Quinn Buckner, but he would not be too well received, as this would be his first and last year as an NBA head coach. But the biggest news coming out of Dallas was that they had selected Kentucky star Jamal Mashburn with the 4th pick in the '93 NBA draft, and it was hoped that him and Jackson could form a great wing duo that could have similar success to their '80s tandem of Rolando Blackman and Mark Aguirre. And it seemed that this could be the case, as in their first season together, they would tie for the team lead in scoring by each averaging over 19 points, as they would both be top 20 scorers in the league, and Jackson would also be the team's top distributor. But they didn't really get any scoring outside of these two, as they finished with the worst scoring offense in the league, and had an overall dysfunctional season under Buckner. Jackson would play and start in all 82 games, as he scored double figures in 76 of them, and had 6 games with at least 30 points. But the Mavs didn't make much of an improvement, as they finished at 13-69, which was the 5th worst record in NBA history at the time. And this included a 16-game, 17-game, and 20-game losing streak over the course of the year. And for the regular season, Jackson averaged about 19 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. After 2 straight years of receiving the 4th pick in the draft, Dallas would get the 2nd pick in '94 and add another piece to their young core in Jason Kidd, as they would now have their 3Js trio, with Jim Jackson as their scoring 2-guard, Jamal Mashburn doing the same on the other wing, and Jason Kidd facilitating the offense and making sure his 2 teammates were happy. But as many know, it was only a matter of time before the honeymoon was over, specifically between Kidd and Jackson. But the '95 season would still be a huge improvement for Dallas. They welcomed back former head coach Dick Motta, and with the addition of eventual co-rookie of the year Kidd, they were able to become a top 10 scoring offense in the league. But you can't be a great scoring offense without scoring, and that's exactly what Jackson and Mashburn provided, as they combined for nearly 50 points per game. Jackson would have the best scoring season of his career, as he would score a then career-high 38 in a November 12th win versus Chicago, in a game where Mashburn dropped 50. Then, not to be outdone, Jackson dropped 50 of his own 2 weeks later in a win versus Denver. He would have 2 games with at least 40 points after that, and score double figures in all but 1 game. But then in a February 24th game versus New Jersey, he would suffer a severe ankle injury, which included torn ligaments, and there was some hope he could return near the end of the year, but it wasn't worth the risk once Dallas was eliminated from playoff contention. Interestingly, Dallas was 20-31 before Jackson went down, but put up a winning record without him, as they went 16-15 the rest of the way. Jackson's 51 games were not enough to qualify him for any leaderboards, but his career-high 25.7 points per game would have placed him as the 5th best scorer in the league. But Jackson's 3rd season ended with him putting up about 25.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists, on a career-high 47.2% shooting. The only season of his career he would shoot over 45%. So going into '96, Jackson was healthy, and the Mavs were excited to make a playoff push for the first time in years. But as quick as their trio came together, they would start to fall apart. Mashburn started the season great, but then after 18 games he would be sidelined by a knee injury, which would be the story of his career. And this injury would end his season. Kidd would show major improvement in year 2, and with Mashburn out, Jackson would be expected to have a similar scoring output as he had the year before. He played and started all 82 games, but his scoring dropped by over 6 points per game, and he shot below 44% from the field. However, he would shoot over 36% from deep on over 4 attempts per game. The Mavs would get a career year out of George McLeod in place of Mashburn, but the season was still a disappointment, as they finished with 10 less wins at 26-56 to miss the playoffs again. And for the regular season, Jackson averaged about 19.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. But this season, and this Mavs team, is remembered less for what happened on the court and more for what happened off of it. Rumor has it that Kidd and Jackson began feuding after Kidd was set to go on a date with R&B singer Toni Braxton. But when she arrived at their Atlanta hotel, she left with Jackson instead of Kidd. And if this was when the Mavs were in town to play the Hawks, that means it occurred just 14 games into the year in early December. So this feud affected the team for the majority of the season. Mashburn would say years later that there was no actual truth to this, but that Braxton used it to help market her album, which was what fueled the feud between the 2 young stars. But it was too late, and Jackson and Kidd's relationship couldn't be salvaged, and Kidd put the nail in the coffin on June 25th, when he gave the Mavs an ultimatum to either trade him or Jackson, and instead of choosing, Dallas general manager Don Nelson would trade both of them, and get rid of Mashburn while he was at it, as he was not happy with what the locker room had become. But they still started the '97 season with all 3 players on the team. The first domino to fall would be Kidd, as he was traded to Phoenix on Boxing Day. Then would come Mashburn, who was traded to Miami on February 14th. And then just 4 days later, Jackson was the headliner in a 9-player deal that saw Dallas receive Sean Bradley, among others. At the time of the trade, Jackson was averaging a career-low 15.5 points in 46 games for Dallas. The Nets were sitting at 15-36, and would then go 11-20 after the Jackson trade, to finish the year at 26-56. Jackson would up his scoring slightly, as he and Sam Cassell, who was also included in the trade, would join Kendall Gill and Kerry Kittles as the 4 players to average over 16 points on the team. However, Jackson would continue to struggle from the field, as he shot below 42% during his 31 games with New Jersey. And for the regular season, he would average about 16 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. Going into the 97 draft, the Nets were extremely high on Utah's Keith Van Horn, who would eventually be selected second overall by Philly. So the Nets would put together a package of players to acquire Van Horn, and included in that package was Jackson. So now Jackson was joining what looked like an up-and-coming Sixers team, with second-year phenom Allen Iverson, third-year guard Jerry Stackhouse, and a veteran forward in Derek Coleman. But after 22 games, Stackhouse would be traded to Detroit. Jackson would again see his scoring drop, but he was no longer the focal point of the offense. However, he was putting in a really solid year for Philly, as after 48 games, he was putting up close to 14 points on 46% from the field and about 35% from deep. However, Jackson reportedly was not happy about his reduced role behind Iverson, and he was slated to be a free agent at the end of the year. So the Sixers weren't feeling confident about their chances of re-signing him. So on February 17th, Jackson would join his 4th team in 2 seasons, when he and Clarence Weatherspoon were traded to Golden State for Joe Smith and Brian Shaw, as all 4 players were in the final year of their contract. Jackson would express optimism for the trade, as he felt that the Warriors' open system would help him recapture his Dallas form and allow him to play his game. Jackson would join a 9-41 Warriors team, who were hurting without their star Latrell Sprewell, who was serving a year-long suspension after choking his coach in an early December practice. Jackson would be a workhorse in his 31 games for Golden State, as he played over 40 minutes per game for the first time in his career, and led the team in scoring and field goal attempts. But he wasn't making a lot of his attempts, as he barely shot 40% from the field, and the Warriors would feature the worst offense in the league and finish at 19-63, as overall Jackson would play 79 games and put up about 15.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. Jackson had grown tired of losing, so in the offseason he decided to sign with Portland before the lockout-shortened 99 year, as he wanted to be a part of a playoff team instead of a team that was building. Jackson would be part of a playoff team, but he would have a forgettable season, as he dealt with knee issues all year, which would plague him for the rest of his career, as he only managed 49 games and was also in a bench role for the first time in his career. He put up career low numbers across the board, as he only received about 24 minutes per game, but Jackson was on a winning team for the first time, as the Blazers finished 35-15. They would sweep the Suns in the first round, and Jackson would have a great playoff debut in a 6th-man role. He was the only non-starter to score in double figures, as he averaged over 12 points per game, and would do so on 50% from the field and from deep, and would also go 19 of 20 from the free throw line. Round 2 would be a 6-game win versus Utah, but Jackson's production would take a steep decline. After putting up at least 12 points in each game of the Phoenix series, he failed to crack double figures or shoot over 40% in the first 5 games of this series, but did score 17 points and go 8 for 8 from the line in their series-clinching Game 6 win. Jackson would have minimal contributions in the Blazers' conference finals loss to San Antonio, which included Sean Elliott's Memorial Day miracle shot to give the Spurs a Game 2 win and eventually help them sweep Portland. Jackson scored a total of 14 points in the 4 games and took only 1 shot in the Blazers' Game 4 loss. But for the regular season, he averaged about 8.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Jackson had yet another change of scenery going into the 2000 season, as he and Isaiah Rider had been traded to Atlanta during the offseason for a package headlined by former All-Star Steve Smith. Although Jackson would get a much larger role this year, it would be a return to losing basketball. Isaiah Rider would be the team's top scorer all year, but with the Hawks sitting at 24-40 with just 18 games left in the year, they waived Rider, as he and management had been in conflict all season. So with Rider gone, the Hawks ended their year with Jackson as their leading scorer, but this wasn't saying too much, as the only other players to crack double figures were Dikembe Mutombo and Allen Henderson. Jackson would again struggle with his shooting, being barely over 41% from the field. However, his 3-point shooting continued to be a bright spot, as he shot over 38% from beyond the arc. He would hit double figures in 70 games and have 3 games with at least 30 this year. But the Hawks finished 28-54, and Jackson ended the year with averages of about 16.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. For the first time in 5 years, Jackson will be on the same team to begin consecutive seasons. However, this streak would end it too. To begin the year with Atlanta, Jackson was putting up a little over 14 points per game and shooting over 42% from deep, but it was again his overall shooting at less than 36% that was hurting the team. Additionally, his knee issues caused him to miss 13 games. So the Hawks made a decision to trade Jackson to Cleveland for point guard Brevin Knight. Jackson was happy about the trade as he got to go back home, and the Cavs were sitting at 16-14 at the time of the trade and were hoping Jackson could provide some scoring, which was lost after a foot injury to Zydrunas Ilgauskas. Unfortunately, Jackson did not deliver like the Cavs hoped, as he would miss another 13 games over the remainder of the season, and when he did play, he still only shot 39%, and his three-point shooting had dropped to below 24%, as the Cavs went 14-38 the rest of the year to miss the playoffs at 30-52. And for his overall regular season, Jackson averaged about 11.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. At this point, Jackson was used to a season starting with him on a new team, but he wasn't used to a season starting without him on any team, which was the case going into 2002. But on December 3rd, he would sign with Miami for the rest of the year. This season couldn't have gone worse for the Heat up to this point, as they were 2-13 at the time of the signing and were coming off their 11th straight loss, as they were hoping Jackson could be a spark off the bench behind starter Eddie Jones, as backups Kendall Gill and Sam Mack were dealing with injury. Jackson would be given quite a large role, as he appeared in 55 games and started 19 of them, while being second on the team with over 33 minutes per game, and would even finish third in scoring behind Jones and center Alonzo Mourning. His most encouraging improvement came in his efficiency, as he shot over 44% from the field and a career-high 46.9% from deep. The Heat went 29-26 with Jackson in the lineup, and were able to turn in a respectable 36-46 season. However, they would still miss the playoffs. And for the regular season, Jackson averaged about 10.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Jackson was not re-signed, and the 03 NBA season would start without him on a team. But on December 1st, he would sign with the Kings, after they lost Hedo Turkoglu to a wrist injury. Jackson would play 63 games this year, coming off the bench in every game. But he seemed to be finding his role, as similar to Miami, he was relatively efficient, shooting over 44% from the field and a team leading 45.1% from deep. And he would finally find himself on a winning team again, making his first playoff appearance in 5 years. Jackson would receive more minutes than any non-starter in the Kings' 5-game first-round series win versus Utah. He would finish as one of 5 players to average double figures and continue his efficient shooting at over 47% from the field and over 46% from deep. Round 2 would bring Dallas, who the Kings lost to in 7 games, but their chances of winning became very slim when Chris Webber tore his ACL in the second half of Game 2. Jackson would have a slow start with just 3 points in Game 1, but he would then average 10 points in Games 2 through 5. But he would really deliver in the final 2 games of the series, as he would have 16 points and 12 rebounds in Game 6 to help keep the Kings alive, then would put up 24 points on 10 of 12 shooting in their Game 7 loss. And for his regular season, he would average about 7.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. Jackson would also say years later that this season in Sacramento had brought back his love for the game for many reasons, and for the first time in years, there was now a demand for Jim Jackson. The Kings were hoping to re-sign him, especially after trading Turkoglu to San Antonio. However, Jackson would accept a 2-year offer from Houston. The 04 Rockets featured a young core of Steve Francis, Yao Ming, and Coutinho Mobley, and Jackson would be the starting small forward all year, and be healthy, as he played 80 games and would be one of 4 starters to average double figures, and he would have at least 10 points in 61 games. His shooting had dropped to 42.4%, but this was understandable as he was in a larger role, and he remained one of the league's top 3-point shooters, as he shot 40% on a career-high 5.1 attempts per game. The Rockets would finish 45-37 and make the playoffs for the first time in 5 years, and would get the Lakers in round 1. Although the Lakers won in 5 games, it was a close series. Jackson would see his efficiency drop, but at 33 years old, he averaged 44 minutes per game in the series, while recording at least 11 points in every game, 3 double-doubles, and a postseason career high of 20 rebounds in a Game 4 loss. But for his regular season, he averaged about 13 points, a career-high 6.1 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Jackson would begin the 05 season with a new-look Rockets team, who had traded Francis and Mobley in the offseason for Tracy McGrady. He began the year as the starting small forward and was putting up similar numbers, although his 3-point shooting had taken a hit. But then on December 27th, he was included in a trade to New Orleans for David Wesley. However, Jackson would refuse to suit up for the Hornets, so on January 21st, he was traded to Phoenix. Jackson joined a great Phoenix team who had just acquired Steve Nash in the offseason, and also featured Sean Marion and Amari Stoudemire. The Suns added Jackson for more depth and experience, as he would be the team's sixth man in the 40 games he played in. He would be the highest scoring non-starter and continue to be a lethal three-point weapon, as he shot nearly 46% from deep. The Suns would complete an epic turnaround to finish at 62-20, the best record in the league. The first round matchup with Memphis would be a 4-game sweep, as Jackson would average 11 points off the bench on over 48% from the field and 50% from deep. Round 2 would bring Dallas, and Jackson would be thrust into a starting role after Joe Johnson suffered an eye injury in Game 2. Phoenix would win the series in 6 games, and Johnson would score double figures in all 4 games he started, including 16 in Game 5 and 21 in Game 6, both Suns wins. Jackson would continue as the starter going into the Western Conference Finals versus San Antonio, and would drop 20 in Game 1, but just wouldn't get too many looks the rest of the series, as Johnson would return to the starting lineup in Game 3, and Jackson never cracked double figures in the series again, as Phoenix lost in 5 games. But Jackson's regular season ended with him averaging about 9 points, 4 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Jackson was re-signed by Phoenix going into the 06 season, but after appearing in 27 games, he would log 24 straight DNPs, as he didn't receive a single minute for 2 months, until he was eventually waived in late February, but then picked up by the Lakers on March 6th, where he would wear number 24, and become the last Laker to wear the number, before Kobe Bryant. He would play sparingly in LA, only playing in 13 games at about 7 minutes per game. The Lakers finished 45-37 and would make the playoffs, but lose to Jackson's former team in the Suns in a 7-game first-round series. But Jackson would only see action in 3 games, playing about 20 minutes and scoring 4 total points, and his regular season ended with him averaging about 3 points, 2 rebounds, and an assist per game. Jim Jackson's career ended after this season, as teams weren't showing interest in his services, marking the end of a confusing career, which started off great before seeing Jackson play for nearly half the teams in the league. He seemed NBA ready coming out of high school and would cement his status as an Ohio sports legend after 3 great seasons with the Buckeyes. But as soon as he got to the NBA, he developed a reputation that he couldn't really shake. He had his best production in Dallas, but it was sandwiched between 2 major controversies, and once he was traded, he could never fully shake his negative labels, and spent the rest of his career in the purgatory of being a player that can add value to a team, but also one that doesn't add enough value to keep around. And it didn't help that he began to struggle with injuries pretty early in his career. He was usually a pretty solid postseason performer, but didn't really get his chances to perform until later in his career, when he had lost a step. But at the same time, he salvaged his career by eventually carving out his role as more of a 3-and-D player, which probably prolonged his career 4 or 5 more years. He had so much promise, but it fizzled out quickly, and his overall career doesn't really jump out at you. He was a star in the making who turned into a journeyman, and although that's not a label most players want, at least there's an argument to be made that Jim Jackson is one of the greatest journeymen of all time. But that's it for today's episode on Jim Jackson. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you like this one, check out this one on one of his running mates in Dallas, or this one on one of his teammates during his time in Phoenix. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.